Nico made the move to get Kyrie Irving in 2023 that I would have advised against, but they bet on the talent. And bless Kyrie's heart. The dude that was in Brooklyn is not the dude that has been there in Dallas. He has done everything that has been asked of him. It has gone from there. And I think Nico put together an interesting team that made the finals, and the kind of team that to me is like, oh, you have some insight on how to build a team, because that's not the team that everybody would have built to figure out how to get there. But after the trade and the whole defense wins championships, if that was the imprint that he would have had, I would have thought that we would have heard a lot more about his team building philosophy before this. And that was one part I thought was interesting in the book, was that I didn't come away from that feeling like, oh, we know what kind of team Nico wants to have. And now suddenly he has this strident idea and it doesn't involve having Luka.
Well, and while Mark Cuban had control of the franchise, like you can have the GM title. You're the GM when he wants to let you be the GM.
Right.
I mean, Cuban's still running the show. And so it wasn't until midway through last season when Cuban gave up the majority share. And, he said he was going to keep basketball operations control. That wasn't reality. I mean, it just wasn't the case. That's when Nico was able to not only take control of basketball ops, but frankly, box Cuban out. Nico did a very intentional job of boxing out and keeping Cuban completely out of the mix. But look, like you said, the Kyrie trade, controversial at the time, didn't pay immediate dividends. They have to tank that year to keep the top 10 protected pick. But Kyrie's been phenomenal in Dallas. And Kyrie and Luka formed a great chemistry. They have a bond. Kyrie really did a great job of kind of learning how to play off of Luka. Luka adapted to, play faster and realize, hey, a simpler thing as a look ahead pass. Get the ball out of his hands, play faster. That empowers Kyrie, empowers his teammates. And that was like one of the great stories of last season, was just how much that duo clicked and how much they enjoyed each other. It's kind of an iconic image where they beat Houston in overtime late in the season. They kind of collapse into each other's arms, and it was a great duo. And then, Nico made moves around like the rest of the starting lineup and rotation that worked. The pick of Derek Lively, trading down to get him at 12 overall. Dude, that's a perfect pick and roll partner for Luka. Nico wants to talk about how his trades didn't work right away or weren't popular right away. He leaves out, like, they tried to give up 2 firsts for Kyle Kuzma. Okay. And then when that fell through because somehow Kuzma had a mythical no trade clause that the Wizards let him use, then he pivoted to one of those firsts is going to Daniel Gafford. One of those firsts is going for PJ Washington. But suddenly you've got this big athletic front court, all these lob targets, all these guys who can really run. Derek Jones Jr. as a minimum was a huge addition last year. And so you've surrounded Luka with this long, athletic, supporting cast that fit around him. And the whole defense wins championship thing, it's like, dude, the Mavericks had the number 1 defense in the league for the last 20 games last year. That continued into the playoffs. They didn't lose to the Celtics because their defense fell apart. And I know you can put up a low light reel of Luka getting blown by. They lost because they didn't hit shots. And if defense wins championships, and that's it. That's the only thing you can do. That's the way we're building this team. Why'd you get Klay Thompson this summer? Like, come on, man. I know Klay's been a hell of a defender throughout the course of his career, but not coming off an Achilles and an ACL in his mid-30s. So, like, what I'm trying to tell you is Nico's plan has been very fluid, and I think he talked during his exit interview press conference about how process-oriented it is. The Luka trade was not process-oriented. The Luka trade was emotional. It was emotional, it was irrational, and it was illogical. And I can tell you for sure it was illogical because I've pressed Nico on very flawed logic in the deal, and all he can say is defense wins championships. Or like, oh, you don't like the trade. We put together a championship caliber roster. You saw it for 2.5 quarters. 2.5 quarters? Brother, I saw a finals run last year. Which one makes me believe more? Come on, man.
Well, my question about the emotion behind the trade, and it seems obvious that I would not have made that trade if for no other reason than these people might kill you. Like, this is like the idea that the fans don't matter. The example I made as I tried to come up with it, I appreciate you willing to make the hard decision, but I grew up an Atlanta Hawks fan, And when they traded Dominique at 34 years old and a torn Achilles, I never came back. And so
Mhm.
I had to stop and say, okay, like the Dallas fans, been a little over the top, but I can't pretend as though I don't understand like the basis of the feeling. What seems surprising to me is there aren't that many people who are around this team on a regular basis that could sense that the frustration was such that a move like this would happen. Like even with hindsight, was there any point that people could look back and say, "Yo, I think Nico's going to might do something wild with this
You
team"?
know, I after Christmas, and that was Luka's fourth calf strain in 28 months, same calf, left calf. And Nico definitely blamed poor conditioning for that. Luka's people said, "Hey, he's come back too soon from injuries, including the left heel. He's whatever." So there was this divide between Nico and Luka's camp for sure. And the level of frustration that Nico had at that time was high. By the way, Jay Kidd's was too. And, I think Jay Kidd's kind of trying to distance himself from
Yes,
this. Jay
he
Kidd's
is.
frustration level was, I can just tell you, with Luka, was also quite high. But I was told at the time, hey, if we got to trade him, and obviously it's off the record, but they traded him now, so I'll say it. If we got to trade him, we'll trade his ass. And I'm like, no, you won't. I seriously, I rolled my eyes. I'm like, okay, you're huffing, you're puffing, you ain't blowing that house down. Give me a break, because it's a ludicrous thing to consider. And how many times, Bomani, have you been talking to somebody and they huff, they puff, they're just talking shit. They ain't going to do anything. And I thought this was one of those cases. And then 6 weeks later, my phone dings. What?
They did it.
What? They actually did it? Again, I was told, venting, we'll trade this guy if we have to. But here's the thing. You didn't have to. You didn't have to. You went to the finals months ago. I mean, okay, the weight fluctuates, there's some defiance. I get it. It's frustrating. Typically, historic production gives a guy a little bit of leeway. And I will just say, and I kind of included this in the last chapter, there are a lot of people who are very strong defenders of Luka who have either been in that organization or remain in that organization. And I'm not going to tell you Luka's low maintenance. I'm just going to tell you, on the superstar spectrum in the NBA, he's not toward the top. He's not. I mean, you can go down the list of superstars. There are several who are more high maintenance than Luka. Somebody in the book says, ask Miami if they'd have rather dealt with Luka or Jimmy Butler for the last few months, leading up to the trade deadline. And that's just one example. You don't give up that kind of talent if he's excited about spending his entire career with your franchise.
Now, see, that's an interesting counterpoint because Jimmy's people will tell you he was very excited about staying there. They just didn't want to give him the money to do it, right?
Well, and again, one, I would say that kind of talent, Luka's a bigger talent than Jimmy Butler. He just is. And two, the obvious thing is Jimmy Butler's a decade older.
Yes.
I mean, they could have had a decade plus run into the future with Luka. And this is where the logic really falls apart. Nico Harrison's own words, he created a 3 to 4 year time frame. And forget what's happened. Obviously, the first year got blown up when Kyrie went down with a knee injury. Next year's in jeopardy. That 3 to 4 year time frame, you gave up to successfully build a contender around Luka, your first round draft capital in 27, 28, 29, and 30. So just as the credit card bill is coming due, your time frame ends. And then, how is that? And I asked Nico straight up in this, weird, no cameras allowed roundtable thing. How is that in the best interest of the Dallas Mavericks? He just kept repeating defense wins championships.
So, is there any recovery possible for Nico? Because at this point, I don't just believe that he has cost himself this job. I don't know what other job he's supposed to get. He obviously can't go back to Nike. I believe Luka still has shoes there. That's not going to happen. He can't get a job with another NBA team right now. I've never seen a backlash against an executive like this ever before. The closest I could give you is Donald Sterling 2014. It's that level of vitriol that he receives. So where does he go from here? Because I do think the roster they had, if Kyrie was healthy, would be an interesting one to watch. I thought they were going to be fine in the short run. But then, of course, you also then reported this week for ESPN that the medical staff is the issue there, and that the medical staff that Nico has brought in may be part of the reason why they were down to 8 players earlier at this point. So what do you do from now if you are Nico Harrison?
Yeah, the medical staff is certainly an issue. I would say it's on a list. I don't know. I don't know. And look, man, Nico's obviously he was running Nike's North American basketball ops for a long time. That's a well-paying position. So is being a general manager of an NBA team. Maybe he just rides off into the sunset. I don't know, but there's like I was talking to somebody who's in an ownership group of another Western Conference team recently, and they basically said, I hate to say it, but this is going to be his legacy. This trade's his legacy. Like he's never going to work in the NBA again. And like there are people around the league who are just like, you have to fire him. Like you that's the only way to begin the healing process with the Mavericks fan base. But Patrick Dumont is not there. He's not there yet. Now, the in Nico we trust era has ended. He wants him to bring in an experienced exec and like I think he's realized like, okay, we've got to have some checks and balances that weren't in place. I think this has been a very educational experience for Patrick Dumont in his first full year as an NBA governor. Also, the realization of, hey, in this world, management's not the stars. The stars are the guys on the floor. That's what this whole league revolves around. The superstars are the guys who drive business in this league, not the bosses.
Well, my thinking is Dumont can't move on from this because he's just too in on this, right? Like this is they were in on this together and they have to answer. I can't believe Nico said this out loud in front of people. And Tim Cato's reporting indicates a similar thing about Dumont, that somehow they didn't know that the fans would be this mad. And I will just say this part, and it's hard to ignore. I think that this is a league of 30 teams. I don't care if you're from America or not. You have a white superstar that people pay to see, right? Like not just some like scrappiness or whatever it is. You have the rarest commodity in the NBA, and you traded it and didn't think that the locals were going to have a problem with it.
I'm not qualified to do the kind of sociological deep dive into this, but there's definitely elements there for sure. And honestly, like as frankly illogical of a basketball decision as this was, I think what's going to ultimately cost Nico his job is this was a terrible, terrible business decision. I think they might lose $1 billion worth of revenue over the course of what would have been a $345 million contract. Nico convinced Patrick Dumont that Supermax deal would be a terrible investment. And look, he thinks Luka's body's going to break down. We'll see if he's right or wrong. I don't care if he suffers a major injury. Luka would have had insane trade value on that contract, just like Damian Lillard did